10 years ago, my parents stole my $1.2 million inheritance and threw me out with just $237. You're no longer our child, you'll never survive without us, they sneered. I walked away without a word. Last night, their 15th desperate call lit up my phone as I sat in my $47 million office. It's 1 a.m. as I sit in my sleek Manhattan office, the city's skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. I swirl a glass of $200 bourbon, a stark contrast to the cheap coffee I once drank during freezing nights in subway stations. My tech startup is now valued at $47 million, and I was featured in last month's Forbes 30 Under 30. The journey from homeless to CEO still feels surreal. My iPhone vibrates again, the 16th call today. Their voicemails have grown increasingly frantic over the past week. Please, we need to talk to you. It's urgent. My mother's once commanding voice now trembles. Your father's condition is getting worse. Please call us back. I replay the memory of that winter night. My father's rage when I discovered the truth about my grandfather's inheritance. My mother's cold silence as they packed my things, and the door slamming behind me with nothing but a backpack and pocket change. I was 18, scared and alone, watching snowflakes settle on my shoulders as I walked away from the only home I'd known. "We have no child like you," were my father's final words. For years, I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, saved every penny. No help, no safety net, just pure survival and determination fueled by their betrayal. Now they need something from me: money, forgiveness, salvation. The irony isn't lost on me. I place my phone face down on the mahogany desk and turn back to the city lights. Whatever crisis they're facing, it can wait until morning, or perhaps forever. After all, I'm no longer their child, right? You guys, I need to take you back to understand why that night, 10 years ago, shattered me completely. Growing up, I was the invisible child in my own family, a shadow next to my brother, Ethan, their golden boy. There was one time when I was 6 that my father picked me up from school instead of the nanny. I'd fallen on the playground and scraped my knee. He'd cleaned it gently, then bought me an ice cream cone. "Don't tell your mother," he'd whispered, almost embarrassed by his kindness. That memory makes what came after even more painful, because I knew they were capable of love. Just not for me. My earliest clear memory is from my 8th birthday. I had spent days dreaming of a gift, maybe a Barbie doll I'd seen at Target. I ran downstairs, eyes wide with hope, only to find Ethan unwrapping a shiny new PlayStation 5. "What about me?" I asked, voice small. My mother barely looked up from her Starbucks coffee. "You don't play games, so what's the point?" she snapped. But the truth? They'd never even given me a chance to try. I sat at the kitchen table, clutching a piece of cake they forgot to cut for me, feeling smaller than ever. By 10, I'd learned to expect nothing. I won first place in my school's math competition, a gold medal I'd worked months for. I begged my parents to come to the ceremony, even called Dad's office twice. "We'll be there," he'd said, but they didn't show. Later, I found out they'd gone to Ethan's football game instead. He'd scored 1 goal, and they threw him a pizza party to celebrate. "Football's a bigger deal than some math thing," Mom said when I asked. My medal sat on my dresser, untouched, while Ethan's trophy got a spot in the living room. At 13, the family Christmas photo told the story of my place. They positioned me at the edge, half my body cut off in the frame. That picture still hangs in their living room, or did last I knew, my face barely visible like I was an afterthought. Every family event was the same. At the dinner table, Ethan's steak was always the juiciest, cut perfectly by Mom, while I got the tough end piece, struggling with a dull knife. On vacations, they'd book a suite for themselves and Ethan at the Marriott, while I got a standard room down the hall. "You don't mind, right?" Dad would say, not waiting for an answer. I'd nod, swallowing the lump in my throat, knowing I didn't belong in their core family. School was my escape, but even that came with a price. I got straight A's every year, but my report cards were met with a shrug. "That's expected," Mom would say, while Ethan's B+ earned him a new pair of $150 Air Jordans and a family dinner at Olive Garden. At 16, I won a statewide essay contest, a $500 prize and a certificate I was so proud of. I showed it to Dad, hoping for once he'd care. He glanced at it then asked, "What's this worth? Can it make money?" My heart sank. Meanwhile, Ethan graduated high school with a C average, and they threw him a $15,000 party, catered food, a DJ, the works. My graduation? I was valedictorian, gave a speech to 500 people, but all I got was, "Don't get cocky, college is the real test." No party, no congratulations, just a reminder I'd never be enough. The worst came at family gatherings. Every Thanksgiving, our extended family would crowd into the dining room, and I'd brace myself for the comments. My uncle once said, "Ethan's got your dad's business brain and charm, but maybe you take after your mom's quiet cousin," an aunt once said, laughing. Mom didn't defend me, she just nodded, adding, "Sophia got all the spark in the family. Some people just shine brighter." You guys, the breaking point came when I was 18, fresh out of high school, still clinging to the hope that my parents might one day see my worth. That hope shattered the day I uncovered the truth about my grandfather's inheritance. It started with an old photo I found in a dusty box at a Goodwill thrift store, a picture of him with me, smiling, and a note on the back. "For my little fighter, $1.2 $1.2 million when you turn 18. My heart raced. I remembered Grandpa's stories about setting aside money for me, something he'd hinted at before he passed. I tracked down the lawyer listed on the will, a retired man named Mr. Hargrove, who still had the original documents. The will was clear, $1.2 million left to me by my grandfather to be released on my 18th birthday. I confronted my parents that same week, trembling but determined. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, the dining room lit by the chandelier's harsh glow. I laid the will on the oak table, my voice shaking. This is my inheritance, $1.2 million from Grandpa. Why didn't you tell me? Mom's eyes widened, her coffee cup clattering against the saucer. How did you get that? She demanded, her tone sharp. Dad leaned back, a sneer curling his lips. That money's been spent, mostly on Ethan's college fund and his startup. It's family money now, none of your business. I couldn't believe it. That's mine, I shouted, my fists clenched, the paper crumpling in my hands. Grandpa left it for me, not you. Dad slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You gave you everything. You should be grateful we even kept you around this long. But you want more? You're nothing to us. Mom's voice cut in, cold and deliberate. You've managed fine on your own, haven't you? Besides, do you think Grandpa really cared? He just scribbled your name to look generous. Her words stung, but Dad wasn't done. Even with that will, it's ours to decide. You're just a burden we've carried for too long. Ethan sauntered in, leaning against the doorway with a smirk. Always so dramatic, he said, popping a grape into his mouth. That's why Mom and Dad love me more. You're too greedy. My chest tightened. I turned to them, tears burning my eyes. You stole from me. You had no right. Dad's face darkened. Rights? We gave you a roof, food, more than you deserve. If you don't like it, get out. Mom nodded, her expression icy. If you're going to make this a fight, then leave. We don't need this drama. The room fell silent, the weight of their words crushing me. I grabbed the will, my hands shaking. Fine, I whispered, my voice breaking. From today, I'm not your child anymore. I'll never ask you for anything again. Dad roared. Get out then. You'll never make it without us. Mom turned away, heading to her room without a glance. Ethan chuckled. Good luck, loser. I stumbled upstairs, threw a few clothes into a backpack, and counted the $237 in my wallet, my life savings. The door slammed behind me as I stepped into the rain, their laughter fading into the night. That moment wasn't just about the money. It was the final nail in the coffin of a family that never wanted me. Mr. Hargrove had warned me they'd resist, but I didn't expect their cruelty to cut so deep. He offered to take the case to court, but I was too broken to fight then. I just walked away, the will clutched to my chest, snow mixing with rain as I headed into the unknown. My parents thought I'd crawl back, begging for forgiveness. They were wrong. That night, I swore I'd prove them all wrong. Ethan's smug grin, Mom's cold indifference, Dad's arrogant sneer. The $1.2 million was gone, but my resolve was stronger than ever. The next morning, I tried calling Mr. Hargrove, but my phone died. Unpaid bills, another gift from their neglect. I sold the only jewelry I had, a locket from Grandpa, for $50 to buy a bus ticket out of town. Ethan later bragged to a friend I'd overheard that they'd handled the inheritance issue, laughing about how I'd never touch it. That fueled me. Every step I took from that rainy doorstep was a step toward taking back what was mine, not just the money, but my dignity. You guys, I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like when they slammed the door that rainy night, but I was wrong. The real descent came in the weeks that followed, when I realized just how cruel the world could be without a safety net. That first night, I ended up at a 24-hour Dunkin' Donuts, nursing a cheap coffee to stay warm. The city was freezing, snow mixing with rain, and I had nowhere to go. I found a corner in Penn Station subway terminal, curled up against the cold glass, my backpack as a pillow. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since that half-eaten granola bar I'd packed. I had $237, but after the $50 bus ticket and $5 for coffee, I was down to $182. I knew I had to make it last. The next few weeks were a blur of survival. My phone died after the first day, unpaid bills, another parting gift from my parents. I couldn't even call Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer who'd offered to help with the inheritance case. I sold Grandpa's locket for $50, but that barely covered a week at a $35 a night motel near the Bronx, a dingy place with stained sheets and roaches skittering across the floor. I'd lie awake, listening to the couple next door screaming, my eyes burning from exhaustion. I applied to 87 jobs in a month, barista, cashier, anything, but got no replies. At one interview, a cafe manager in Midtown flipped through my resume and scoffed. No experience, no references, and you're fresh out of high school? What makes you think you're worth hiring? I mumbled something about my SAT scores, but he cut me off. I don't care about your test scores. Can you work a coffee machine? I couldn't. He sent me packing. I finally landed a job washing dishes at a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, $7.25 an hour, 16-hour shifts with no breaks. The kitchen was a furnace, oil splattered my arms, leaving tiny burns, and the air was thick with grease. My boss, a wiry man named Mr. Chun, yelled constantly. One night, I dropped a plate, and and he exploded. You useless idiot. That's coming out of your pay. That $5 deduction meant I couldn't afford dinner. I went to bed on an empty stomach, my hands raw from scrubbing. After a month, I'd saved $420, but the motel raised its rate to $40 a night, and I was back to square one. My first small victory came when I found a free community shower at a local shelter. Being able to wash my hair with actual shampoo felt like winning the lottery. The shelter volunteer, an older woman named Grace, slipped me an extra sandwich that day. You're too thin, she whispered. That small kindness almost broke me. My body started giving out. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks, my eyes stinging like they'd been rubbed with sandpaper. One night, after a 17-hour shift, I collapsed in the restaurant's alley, my knees hitting the pavement. The stench of rotting garbage filled my nose as I dry heaved, too weak to stand. I hadn't eaten in 36 hours. I dragged myself to the motel, curled up on the lumpy mattress, and cried for the first time since that night I left. The sobs came hard, my voice hoarse, until the guy next door banged on the wall, shouting, "Shut up." I buried my face in the pillow, muffling the sound, feeling more alone than ever. I hit my lowest point one freezing February night. I'd been fired from the restaurant after dropping another plate. Mr. Chin screamed, "You're a liability," and threw me out with my last $50 paycheck. I had $12 left, no job, no home. I stood by the East River, the wind biting my cheeks, staring at the black water. For a moment, I thought about jumping, just ending it all. But then I remembered Grandpa's note. For my little fighter. I couldn't let him down. I couldn't let them win. A flicker of hope came the next day. I'd started hanging out at a 24-hour Starbucks to stay warm, reading a coding book I'd borrowed from the New York Public Library. My one escape. A man in a tailored Armani suit, maybe late 30s, noticed me scribbling Python code on napkins. He was a Silicon Valley tech director named Daniel, in town for a TechCrunch conference. "You're teaching yourself to code?" he asked, eyeing my worn-out book. I nodded, too tired to explain. He watched me debug a simple function for 5 minutes, then slid me his business card. "I respect the hustle, kid. I've got an internship opening, but don't expect me to go easy on you." I clutched that card like a lifeline, whispering to myself in the diner's dim light, "This is my shot. I can't mess it up." That night, I splurged on a $7 meal, the first real food I'd had in weeks. As I ate, hope flickered in my chest. That tattered business card from Daniel became my lifeline, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. After that freezing night by the East River, I threw myself into coding with everything I had. I spent my days washing dishes at odd jobs to scrape by, then snuck into the public library after closing hours, using their free computers until the security guards kicked me out at midnight. I borrowed 3 dog-eared books, Java, Python, and data structures, reading by the dim glow of a street lamp when the library shut. I'd sleep 3 hours a night on a park bench, my fingers numb from typing, waking at 4 a.m. to hit a 24-hour Starbucks for coffee and more coding. That internship Daniel offered, 20 hours a week at $15 an hour, was my shot, and I wasn't messing it up. My first real victory came when I saved enough for a used laptop, $2.99 at a pawn shop. I cradled it like a newborn, all the way home to the hostel, where I'd rented a bed. That night, I coded until sunrise, ignoring the snores around me. When I bought my first new shirt for the interview with Daniel, I stood straighter, feeling human again. Small victories kept me going. 6 months later, I aced the first coding test Daniel threw at me. He'd given me a brutal project, optimizing a database for a client, and I pulled 3 all-nighters to finish it. When I handed it over, he raised an eyebrow. "Not bad, kid," he said, a rare smirk breaking his usual stern face. "You're in full-time, $85,000 a year." I nearly dropped my laptop. That first paycheck let me rent a tiny studio in Queens. No roaches, no screaming neighbors, just a mattress and a desk, but it was mine. The day I moved in, I bought myself a real pillow and slept for 12 straight hours. When I woke up, I cried again, but this time from relief. No one could kick me out. No one could tell me I wasn't enough. Daniel's feedback stuck with me. "You've got the grit of a machine and the mind of a sponge." I worked twice as hard as anyone, taking on the toughest bugs, staying late to debug code while others clocked out. I made friends with the cleaning lady, Maria, who'd sometimes leave a homemade empanada on my desk. "You remind me of my daughter," she'd say in Spanish. Always working, never stopping. I learned Spanish from her during our late-night conversations, adding another skill to my arsenal. 3 years in, my life exploded. I developed an algorithm that cut the company's AWS server costs by $1.2 million annually. Ironic, right? The CEO handed me a $150,000 bonus check and a promotion to lead developer. I framed the check before cashing it, taking a picture to remind myself how far I'd come. That weekend, I treated myself to a proper meal at a real restaurant. The waiter asked if I was celebrating something. "My life," I answered. By 28, a Silicon Valley giant poached me as their tech VP, offering $730,000 a year plus $2 million in stock options. I bought a penthouse in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I once slept under. The day I moved in, I set up my desk facing the East River, where I'd once contemplated ending it all. Now I could see for miles. styles. From designer bags to a Rolex watch, luxuries I'd never dreamed of became my norm. I'd sit on my balcony sipping bourbon, the skyline a reminder of my rise from $237 to millions. Meanwhile, my family's world was crumbling. I heard through an old classmate, Sarah, that my parents' business, some shady real estate venture, had tanked in the last recession. They'd lost their $2 million house to Bank of America, and the third foreclosure notice had Dad hospitalized with a heart attack. Medical bills hit $250,000, but their insurance lapsed years ago. Ethan's startup? A total flop. He'd blown through $350,000 in investor money, faced a fraud lawsuit from investors, and was now under house arrest, his ankle tagged with a monitor. Sarah texted me, "Your mom asked about you. They're desperate. Can you help?" I laughed, the sound echoing in my empty penthouse. "Tell them I'm busy," I replied. I didn't lift a finger. Every night, I'd stand by those windows, the city lights twinkling below, and think of that subway corner where I'd shivered. My phone stayed silent. No calls, no pleas, until last week, when Sarah said they'd tried visiting my office. Security turned them away, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just the cold satisfaction of watching their chaos unfold. Ethan's Instagram posts, once brimming with flexes, now begged for GoFundMe donations to pay his lawyers. Mom and Dad's old friends stopped replying, their social circle gone. The irony? They'd built their lives on my back, and now it was collapsing without me. I've moved on. Last month, I closed a deal to expand my company to London, hiring 150 new employees. Daniel, now a mentor, grinned at the news. "You've outgrown us, kid," he said over dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. I smiled, raising a glass of wine. The past, those sneers, that slammed door, feels like a distant dream. But I keep Grandpa's note framed on my desk, for my little fighter. It's not just about the money or the penthouse. It's about proving them wrong every single day. And as their world burns, I'm just getting started. You guys, as the elevator doors closed, the office fell silent, leaving me alone with the rain's soft patter against the windows. I stood there, watching their shadows vanish in the storm, my heart steady. No rage, no guilt, just a quiet clarity. They'd begged, they'd cried, but I felt nothing. I walked to my desk and picked up an old photo I'd kept in a drawer, the family Christmas picture from when I was 13, me shoved to the edge, half cropped out. I lit a match, the flame flickering in the dim light, and set the photo ablaze. The edges curled, my family's faces swallowed by fire, until only ash remained. Some wounds don't heal with apologies, some betrayals time can't erase. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my balcony at 3 a.m., watching the city that had once rejected me, now stretched out before me like a kingdom. For the first time, I allowed myself to really feel everything, the pain, the triumph, the emptiness that sometimes still echoed inside me despite all I'd achieved. The truth is, success doesn't erase trauma. My designer clothes and penthouse views couldn't change the fact that I'd been a child they didn't want. But standing there under the stars, I realized something important. I'd learned the hard way that they never wanted me. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd fought my way up, alone, and I finally realized something. I was enough. The next morning, I signed the final papers for the London expansion, my company's new office, set to employ 200 people, a fresh start far from this city of ghosts. At the JFK Airport terminal, I ran into Daniel, my old mentor, grabbing coffee before his flight to San Francisco. "You're finally free, aren't you?" he said, his eyes sharp with understanding. I nodded, a real smile breaking through for the first time in years. As we parted ways, he squeezed my shoulder. "Your parents showed up again yesterday after you left," he said. "Security called me." I tensed, but he continued. "I told them their daughter had built something extraordinary without them. That's revenge enough, don't you think?" His words stayed with me as I boarded my flight. Before takeoff, I deleted every trace of them, photos, voicemails, numbers, erasing the past with a single tap. But I kept one thing, Grandpa's will. Not as a weapon anymore, but as a reminder of the one person who saw my worth when no one else did. On the plane, a young woman sat next to me, nervously clutching a coding textbook, the same one I'd studied years ago. She caught me looking and blushed. "I'm trying to change careers," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. "Everyone says I'm too old to start over at 26. I thought of myself at 18, homeless and hopeless. I started with nothing but that book and $237, I told her. Her eyes widened as I continued. "The secret isn't being the smartest in the room. It's outlasting everyone who says you can't." I pulled out my business card, embossed with my name and CEO, and wrote my personal email on the back. "When you finish that book, email me. I'm always looking for fighters." As the plane took off, I watched the clouds stretch endlessly outside my window, my chest lighter than ever. True wealth isn't the $47 million in my bank account or the penthouse I left behind. It's the strength I forged through their betrayal, the justice I fought for with every step. Family isn't blood, it's the love you choose, the people who lift you up, not the ones who tear you down. I thought of Grandpa's note still framed on my desk. For my little fighter, he'd be proud. The scars they left don't define me, they built me. And I wasn't done yet. As the elevator doors closed behind them, I stood alone in my office, watching their shadows disappear into the night. They had nothing left, and I had everything I needed. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I wasn't defined by their rejection anymore, or by the lies they told to others. The truth was clear, and the world was mine to conquer. The next chapter of my life awaited. No more shadows, no more past. Just the future, stretching out before me like the city lights below.